The Galactic Council entered human space. None returned. The recorder is running. I know because the small red light blinks once every 3 seconds, steady as a heartbeat. I am speaking into it not because anyone ordered me to, but because 17 ships entered human space 4 weeks ago and not one of them has spoken since. Someone needs to say what happened. It might as well be me. My name is Oliver Grant. I hold the rank of Junior Xenodiplomat in the Council's Foreign Affairs Bureau, Station 7, Neutral Zone Delta. I am 26 years old and I have spent the last 4 weeks watching my superiors grow very quiet, very pale, and very careful about what they say out loud. They sent the delegation on a Tuesday. I remember because I was eating breakfast when the launch notification came through. 17 ships. The lead vessel was the Council cruiser named Voice of Accord, commanded by Admiral Petra van den Berg, a woman who had personally negotiated 11 planetary annexations and never lost her composure in any of them. She had neat gray hair and a habit of finishing other people's sentences. Beside her on the manifest were 4 senior mediators, 9 military escorts, a full survey team, and a diplomatic attaché named Leon Farrow, who had once made a species of silicon-based hive minds agree to a trade treaty in under 48 hours. These were not amateurs. These were the best the Council had. The ultimatum had been delivered 3 months earlier. 6 star systems, designation cluster H7 through H12, were to be transferred to Council administrative control within 90 days. The Council's reasoning was, as always, clean and procedural. Those systems sat along a contested corridor. They produced resources the Council needed for 3 ongoing infrastructure projects. And humanity, by every metric the Council used, was a young species, newly spacefaring, not yet a full member, and therefore not yet entitled to the kind of territorial sovereignty that a fully ratified member enjoyed. No one on the Council expected trouble. I heard Director Holly say it himself the morning the delegation launched. He was standing by the observation window with a cup of tea, watching the ships drop into jump sequence, and he said to no one in particular, "They will grumble and then they will sign." He sounded so certain that I almost believed him. The ships crossed into human space at 600 station time. I was at my post, logged in, monitoring the relay feeds. The first 20 minutes of telemetry were perfectly normal. The formation held. The ships moved at expected speeds. The communication channels were open and quiet. Then at 6:21, the telemetry stopped. Not static, not a distress signal, not an explosion signature, just nothing, as if a switch had been thrown. All 17 feeds went dark at the same moment, and the silence that followed was so complete that my first thought was that the relay station had malfunctioned. I ran a diagnostic. The relay was fine. I flagged the anomaly and sent it up the chain. Within 10 minutes, 3 senior officers were standing behind me, reading the same empty screens I was reading. No one said anything for a long time. Finally, Commander Etta Yilmaz put her hand on the back of my chair and said quietly, "Run it again." I ran it again, same result. They spent the next 6 hours trying to raise the delegation through every channel available. Long-range relay, burst transmission, emergency beacon ping, quantum echo pulse, all of it. Nothing came back. The space where 17 ships had been was simply silent, the way deep space is silent when there is nothing in it at all. The Council convened an emergency session. I was not invited, but I could see the lights in the chamber from the corridor, burning all through the night. 3 days passed. On the morning of the 4th day, the receiving array picked up a signal from the direction of human space. It was short. It was transmitted on a standard open diplomatic frequency, the kind any junior clerk could have sent, and it said, word for word, "We are still here. Were you looking for something?" I was the one who decoded it. I sat there for a full minute just reading those 9 words on my screen, and I felt something move through me that I could not name. It was not exactly fear. It was the feeling you get when you realize the ground you were standing on is not the ground you thought it was. I forwarded the message up the chain and went back to my recorder. 17 ships, the best the Council had, and the humans sounded, across the void of space, politely, mildly, almost gently confused. That was the part I kept returning to. Not the ships being gone, not the silence, the tone of that message. 9 words that managed to communicate absolutely nothing threatening, nothing aggressive, nothing that the Council could file as a hostile act, and yet somehow communicated everything. We are still here. Were you looking for something? Like they had noticed us. Like they had been watching us the whole time. Like the 17 ships had passed through their space the way a child's ball rolls into a neighbor's garden, and the neighbor had picked it up and was now holding it very calmly, waiting to see if anyone would knock on the door properly this time. Director Hollies did not finish anyone's sentences that day. He stood at the window again, but he had forgotten his tea. Commander Yilmaz asked me to compile every piece of intelligence we had on human space, geography, settlement patterns, known infrastructure, anything from our deep-range probes. She said to be thorough. She said to start immediately. She did not say why, but I knew. The Council needed to understand what had just happened, and so far, not one person in a position of authority had been willing to say out loud what I was already thinking. The delegation had not been destroyed. If they had been destroyed, there would have been debris. There would have been a shockwave, an energy signature, something. Ships that get destroyed leave marks. Ships that simply stop transmitting and leave no trace at all, that is something else entirely. Something had taken them, quietly, completely, without a single distress call from any of 17 vessels, each of which had its own independent emergency systems. And then the humans had sent 9 words on a public channel, pleasant as a greeting card. I pulled up everything I had. I started reading. I started the recorder. Someone needs to understand what happened here. I am beginning to suspect that someone is me. The files I needed did not want to be found. That was the first thing I noticed, 4 hours into my research. It was not that the information on humanity was absent from the Council's archives. It was that it was buried, layered under category tags that did not quite match, filed under old mission numbers, cross-referenced to reports that themselves referenced other reports, each one a little harder to pull than the last. The kind of organizational tangle that happens when nobody is deliberately hiding something, but nobody is particularly eager to surface it either. I found the first useful document at the bottom of a probe mission log from 81 years ago. It was a single paragraph, tagged as a navigational footnote. It said that Deep Survey Probe Designation DS-7, dispatched toward the Sol System's outer approach corridor, had failed to return. The cause was listed as probable equipment malfunction combined with navigational drift. The mission was closed with no further action. The date on the file was stamped and signed by a Council archivist who had been dead for 50 years. I stared at that paragraph for a long time. One probe, 81 years ago, failed to return, listed as an equipment problem and quietly filed away. I opened a second window and started searching for probe missions in that sector during that period. I found 4 more with similar notations, all of them listed as probable malfunctions, all of them filed away, none of them ever followed up. 5 probes over 30 years, and the Council had concluded each time that the machines had simply broken. Not once had anyone asked whether something on the other end had intercepted them. I wrote that down and kept going. The main intelligence file on humanity was substantial, but almost all of it was surface level. Population counts, political structures, early spaceflight capability assessments, resource surveys of their home system. The kind of information you collect when you have already decided what something is, and you are only gathering data to fill in the boxes of a form you wrote before you started looking. Humanity, according to the file, was a Class 3 emergent civilization, spacefaring for approximately 240 years, technology rated at mid-tier, advancing steadily but without any anomalous acceleration, estimated military capacity, modest, territorial claims, 6-star systems plus home system, diplomatic status, provisional associate non-voting. Nothing in the file suggested a threat. Nothing in the file suggested they could make 17 of our ships disappear in the span of 21 minutes without leaving a single debris field. I went back further. I pulled their pre-contact history. This was where the reading became difficult, but not in the way I expected. I expected to find a primitive, violent species slowly climbing toward civilization, the way most species do. What I found was something harder to categorize. Their history was a long sequence of catastrophes, each one large enough to end a civilization, each one somehow survived. They had, at one point in their history, been within a small number of years of a full-scale nuclear exchange between two of their largest nations. The weapons they had built during that period were capable of rendering their home planet uninhabitable. They had aimed those weapons at each other for decades. They had kept them aimed, on high alert, ready to fire within minutes of an order, for a span of time longer than most civilizations spend achieving spaceflight. They did not fire them. I sat with that for a moment. It was not that they could not. It was not that they did not want to. Multiple points in the historical record showed they came very close, including one incident where a single human officer had refused to forward a false alarm to his superiors, a decision he made alone, in the middle of the night in a bunker, with his career and his freedom on the line. His name was Stanislav Petrov. I noted it because it seemed important. They had survived that. Then they had survived a global climate crisis that restructured their coastlines and displaced a large fraction of their population. Then a series of cascading economic failures. Then a pandemic that moved faster than any response system they could track, and still they had tracked it, built countermeasures, and come out the other side diminished but functional. What I noticed, and what the Council's intelligence file had completely failed to note, was the pattern underneath all of it. Every time humanity reached a wall, they did not negotiate with the wall. They did not retreat from the wall. They studied it. They mapped it. They found the cracks in it, and if there were no cracks, they made some, and then they walked through. More than that, they learned. Each disaster they survived made the next survival slightly more efficient. They built institutions, yes, but they also built something harder to quantify, a cultural reflex. An instinct that said, when things are worst, slow down and think before you act. And they were patient, extraordinarily patient, in a way that was unusual for a species still in its early centuries of space travel. Most young civilizations, upon first contact with a body like the Council, either rushed toward alliance or toward confrontation. Humanity had done neither. They had filed their paperwork, attended their provisional hearings, voted in their non-binding capacity, and said very little of consequence for the better part of 2 centuries. I pulled up their early diplomatic transcripts. Their representatives had been pleasant, cooperative even. They asked good questions. They accepted provisional status without apparent resentment. They expressed interest in full membership but did not push for it. They were, by every measure, model candidates for eventual integration. It was only now, sitting in the archive room with a dead relay and 9 words glowing on my screen, that I understood what that behavior actually was. It was not compliance, it was observation. They had spent 2 centuries watching how the Council operated, watching how full members were treated versus provisional members, watching which decisions the Council made quickly and which ones it deliberated over, watching where the power actually lived inside the structure, as opposed to where the official documents said it lived. They had been gathering information, quietly, patiently, with no announcement and no indication that anything unusual was happening. I thought about the 5 probes. I thought about 17 ships. I thought about the fact that their response to an ultimatum had been silence followed by 9 words on an open channel. I opened a star chart of human space and overlaid the known probe trajectories. The probes had all disappeared in the same region, a corridor of space that, on the chart, appeared to be relatively empty, a buffer zone between the outer edge of their claimed territory and the main approach routes from Council space. It was not empty, I was now certain of that. I called up every long-range optical survey we had of that corridor. The resolution was not high. Council survey assets did not spend much time focusing on space that the charts had already labeled as low-value transit. But there was something there, faint, almost invisible against the background radiation, a kind of structure that was too regular to be natural and too spread out to match anything in our known construction database. I zoomed in as far as the imagery would allow. I could not resolve it clearly, but I could see enough to understand that whatever was in that corridor had not been built in a hurry. It had not been built recently. It had the look of something built slowly, over a very long time, by people who were not in any rush and did not want to be noticed. My hands were still on the keyboard. I realized they had stopped moving. I thought about what I was looking at. I thought about an intelligence file that had confidently rated humanity as mid-tier and modest, and advancing steadily, without anomalous acceleration. Someone had written that file without looking carefully enough. Or someone had looked carefully and decided to write the file that way for reasons I was not authorized to know. I did not know which possibility frightened me more. I saved my working notes, flagged the image file for enhancement, and started a new document. The title I gave it was simple, What We Missed. I did not sleep that night. I kept reading, and the more I read, the more clearly I could see the shape of something that the Council had been looking at for 2 centuries without ever quite seeing. Humanity had not been waiting to be noticed. They had been waiting to see whether we were worth noticing back. That distinction, I was beginning to understand, was everything. The message that came 2 days later changed the situation entirely. It did not come through the standard diplomatic channel. It came through the emergency contact line, the one reserved for situations involving imminent loss of life or structural breakdown of negotiations. No one had used that line to contact the Council from human space before. The fact that they knew the channel existed and knew the protocol for activating it told me something by itself. The message was addressed directly to the Council's Foreign Affairs Bureau, and it was addressed specifically to me, not to Director Hollies, not to Commander Yilmaz, to Oliver Grant, Junior Xenodiplomat, Station 7. I read my own name 3 times before I accepted that I was reading it correctly. The message said, "We are prepared to speak with a representative. We would prefer someone who has been reading the archives. We believe that person is you. Come alone, 1 vessel, no weapons systems active. We will meet you at the boundary marker on approach corridor 7. We suggest Tuesday." I sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then I picked up the recorder and told it everything. I filed the message with Commander Yilmaz at 800. By 900, the entire senior staff had read it. By 1000, Director Hollies had convened a closed session from which I was excluded for the first 4 hours. By 1400, I was sitting in a chair on the other side of his desk, and he was looking at me in a way that suggested he had not quite decided what I was yet. "You will go," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "You understand that we cannot guarantee your safety." "They could have done whatever they intended to do with 17 warships," I said. "They haven't. I think that's the best guarantee available." He looked at me for a long moment, then he nodded once. "Tuesday," he said. I spent Monday preparing. I reviewed every piece of intelligence I had compiled, memorized the key points, and tried to sleep. Sleep came in short stretches and then dropped me back into wakefulness. I lay in the dark of my quarters and thought about Stanislav Petrov making a decision alone in a bunker. I thought about a species that had looked into total destruction and decided, each time, to try one more thing before giving up. I thought about the fact that they had asked for someone who had been reading the archives. They had known I was reading. They had been watching Station 7 closely enough to identify a junior diplomat spending late nights in the archive room. That implied a level of surveillance capability that the Council had never attributed to them. It also implied that they had been selective. They could have demanded Director Holly's. They could have demanded the Council chair. They asked for the person doing homework. I found that both reassuring and deeply sobering. Tuesday came. I boarded the shuttle assigned to me, a small, clean vessel with no weapons as requested, running full transparency on all active systems. I filed the departure log, confirmed my heading for approach Corridor 7, and left Station 7 behind me. The transit took 6 hours. I spent most of it at the observation window, watching the stars shift as the shuttle moved deeper into the buffer zone. The zone looked empty, the same way it always looked empty on the charts and the survey images. But I was no longer reading it the same way. I reached the boundary marker at 1400. It was a small automated relay beacon, Council-built, placed there decades ago to mark the edge of Council-surveyed space. It blinked its navigation signal at regular intervals, patient and indifferent. For 11 minutes, nothing happened. Then something appeared at the edge of my sensor range, not emerging from a jump point, not dropping out of faster-than-light travel with the characteristic signature I knew. It simply resolved as if it had been there the whole time and had only now decided to be visible. One vessel, size comparable to a mid-range Council scout ship. No weapons signatures. Hull configuration unlike anything in my identification database. Smooth, dark, running so cold that if I had not been looking directly at the sensor readout, I might have thought the space in front of me was still empty. A communication request came through on my channel. I accepted it. The voice that came through was unhurried, warm, even, a man's voice, clear and unaccented in the common trade language as though he had been speaking it his whole life. "Oliver Grant," he said. "My name is Alan Ford. Thank you for coming." "Thank you for the invitation," I said. And then, because it seemed like the most honest thing I could contribute, I said, "You know why I'm here." "We do," Alan Ford said. "And we know what you found in the archives. That saved us a great deal of explanation time. We appreciate the thoroughness." I watched the ship on my sensor display. It had not moved. It made no threatening gesture. "The delegation," I said. "I need to know." "They are safe," he said immediately. No pause, no calculation in the answer. "All crew, all vessels, intact, resting comfortably actually. We can show you." "I would like that," I said. "Then follow us," Alan Ford said. "And don't be concerned about the sensor readings becoming unusual. It's going to look strange. That's normal." I almost asked him to explain what he meant. Then the space around his ship changed. It did not warp or twist. It simply became deeper, the way a room looks when you realize it has a second door you had not seen before. And through that depth, other shapes began to resolve, faint at first, then clearer, then impossible to mistake. Structures, vast and quiet, running in near-total emission silence, distributed across a volume of space that the Council's charts had been calling empty for 80 years. I exhaled slowly. "You've been here the whole time," I said. "Yes," Alan Ford said, "we have." His shuttle began to move. I followed. There are moments in life when the scale of what you are seeing does not fit inside the understanding you arrived with. You have to rebuild your understanding from the floor up while you are still standing on it. That is what the next several hours felt like. Alan Ford guided my shuttle through approach corridor 7, past the boundary marker, and into what the Council's charts had confidently labeled as sparse transit space with no significant infrastructure. It took approximately 4 minutes of flight for me to understand that the chart was wrong on a level that was almost architectural. The first thing I registered was the relay network. It was subtle. The individual nodes were small, placed at intervals that mimicked natural background variations in the debris field, each one emitting on a frequency just inside the noise floor of standard Council sensor sweeps. You would not find it if you were not looking for it. You would not look for it if you had already decided the region was empty. The network extended further than my sensors could resolve in either direction. "How long?" I asked over the open channel. "The relay grid," Alan Ford said. "About 60 years. The outer shell took longer. We started that about 90 years ago." 90 years. The Council had been watching humanity for 2 centuries and had seen a young, developing civilization, advancing steadily without anomalous acceleration. They had built this in the gaps between our observations. The shuttle moved deeper. The structures became clearer as we approached, not because they had grown larger, but because the emissions discipline relaxed slightly, as if permission had been given. What had looked like empty space from the outside now resolved, layer by layer, into something that had no word for it in any Council file I had ever read. It was not a base. It was not a station. It was not anything that fit a known category. It was a distributed system, dozens of installations spread across a volume of space, connected by the relay grid, each one self-contained and independently functional. The largest of them, which I could now see clearly ahead, was the size of a small moon, except that it was built rather than grown, and it sat in space with the quiet solidity of something that had been exactly where it was for a very long time. "What is that?" I said. "We call it Anchor Point 1, Alan Ford said. "It is the oldest installation in the zone. Construction began about 112 years ago. 112 years. Before humanity's first long-range space travel, before they had been formally contacted by the Council. They had begun building this before the Council had any idea they were doing it." "How?" I said, and then stopped, because the question was too large to finish. "Carefully," Alan Ford said, and there was a quiet humor in his voice that was not unkind. "We docked at Anchor Point 1 through a bay that opened without any visible mechanical action, smooth and silent, the way things work when the engineering behind them is very good and very mature. The gravity inside was standard human range. The air was clean. The lighting was warm. It looked, honestly, like a place people had been living in for a long time and had taken care of." Alan Ford met me at the airlock. He was taller than I expected, with close-cropped brown hair and an easy, open expression. He looked like someone who had been doing difficult work for many years and had found a way to carry it lightly. He extended his hand, which I knew from cultural briefings was a human greeting gesture, and I shook it. "Welcome," he said simply. He walked me through the installation, and I asked questions, and he answered them without hesitation, which was itself a piece of information. He was not guarding anything. He had decided to show me things, and he was showing them. The Anchor Point had living quarters, research sections, a medical facility, agricultural modules running hydroponic systems, power generation units that hummed with an output profile I did not fully recognize but which was clearly substantial, and fabrication bays that were, as far as I could tell, currently building more of themselves. "How many people live here?" I asked. "Across all installations in the zone, about 300,000, Alan Ford said. I had expected a military outpost. I had expected weapon emplacements and hardened command centers. What I was walking through felt instead like a community, like people had decided to live here, not just work here. Children's drawings were pinned to a wall near one of the corridors. A row of boots sat outside a door. Someone had put a small plant on a windowsill looking out into the stellar dark. "I want to see the delegation," I said. Alan Ford nodded. "Of course." He took me to a habitat ring on the far side of the installation. The ring rotated slowly for gravity. Inside, the corridors were clean and bright, and the doors to the quarters were unlocked. We found Admiral Petra van den Berg in a common room, sitting at a table with a cup of something hot and a data pad. Across from her was a young human technician named Claire, who was showing her something on a secondary screen that appeared to be a board game. The Admiral looked up when I walked in. She was not in distress. She was not frightened. She was, if I read her expression correctly, somewhere between irritated and deeply thoughtful, in the specific ratio that I imagined she maintained when confronted with situations that defied her existing frameworks. "Grant," she said, "you found us." "They found me," I said. She set down her cup. "How long have we been here?" 26 days, I said. She absorbed that. "They haven't restricted us. We can move throughout this ring. We've been fed. The crew is healthy." She paused. "They've been talking to us, the human staff here, answering questions." She looked at the data pad in her hands, then set it down carefully. "Do you know what this place is?" "I'm beginning to," I said. "They built it without telling anyone," she said. "For generations. While sitting in our provisional hearings and filing our participation forms and voting in our non-binding capacity." She said that last phrase in a tone that suggested she was remembering every time the council had reminded a human representative that their vote was non-binding. "Yes," I said. "And the ships," she said, "the escort vessels, they were intercepted before any of us knew what was happening. No alarm, no alert. They simply were no longer where they had been, and then we were here." She looked at me steadily. "I need you to understand something, Grant. That is not a capability the council attributed to them. That is not a capability I have ever seen." "I know," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do they want?" I looked at Alan Ford, who was standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, patient and unhurried. "I was about to find out," I said. We sat in a meeting room that had a wide viewport looking out into the zone. From here, with the emissions discipline relaxed, I could see the shapes of other installations in the distance, different sizes, different configurations, all of them quiet and working and very clearly real. Alan Ford sat across from me. With him were two others, a woman named Diane Cole, who was introduced as the zone's senior coordinator, and a man named Peter Shaw, who was introduced simply as the person who had authored the message inviting me here. Peter Shaw was older than the others, with deep-set eyes and the kind of stillness that comes from having thought about something for a very long time. They did not open with demands. They opened with a question. Peter Shaw said, "Oliver, before we discuss anything formal, we would like to know, what was your honest assessment of the situation from your side before you came here?" I considered the question. I decided honesty was the only currency worth spending. "I thought the council had made a serious error in judgment," I said, "by treating your provisional status as a ceiling rather than a beginning, and by sending a military delegation to deliver an ultimatum to a species it had not actually studied carefully." Peter Shaw looked at Diane Cole. Something passed between them that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "That is a fair assessment," he said, "and it matches what we have observed over the past 2 centuries. He folded his hands on the table. "The council assumed that because we accepted provisional status, we were satisfied with it. We were not satisfied with it. We accepted it because it was the offered arrangement and because it gave us time." "Time for this," I said, indicating the viewport and everything beyond it. "Partly," Diane Cole said. She had a precise, careful way of speaking that reminded me of someone who had trained themselves to mean exactly what they said and nothing more. "But not only this. Time to understand what the council is, beyond what it presents itself as. Time to see how it treats those who are dependent on it versus those who are not. Time to determine whether membership would be worth the cost. "And what did you conclude?" I said. Peter Shaw said, "We concluded that the Council is neither good nor bad in any absolute sense. It is a very large institution that has existed for a very long time, and like all such institutions, it has developed habits. Some of those habits are useful. Some of them are not. The habit of treating young civilizations as resources to be managed rather than partners to be heard is one of the less useful ones." I waited. "The ultimatum," Alan Ford said, his voice quiet and even, "was not a surprise. We had modeled something like it approximately 15 years ago, when the resource surveys of Corridor H7 became more frequent. We had contingency plans in place. When the delegation entered the zone, we had 4 options prepared. We chose the one that caused the least disruption." "Taking the ships without harming anyone," I said. "Redirecting them," Alan Ford said, with a slight emphasis on the word that was not corrective but precise. "What were the other options?" I asked. A pause. Then Peter Shaw said, "We decided not to use them. That is what matters." And somehow, in the simple directness of that answer, I understood more about humanity than I had from all the archive files combined. They had other options. They had chosen this one. They wanted me to know that the choice had been deliberate. Diane Cole opened a folder on the table between us and slid it toward me. It was a physical document. Paper. I had not handled a paper document in years. "These are our terms," she said. I looked down at the first page. The delegation, all 17 ships, would be released unconditionally. No penalties requested. No apology demanded. The crews were free to go. The ships would be returned with full fuel and provisions. The 6 star systems in Corridor H7 through H12 would remain under human management. Not because humanity was claiming them by force, but because humanity was formally asserting their right as a spacefaring civilization to manage their own territory, and requesting that the Council recognize that right in the same way it recognized the rights of full members. In exchange, humanity was prepared to engage in formal membership negotiations, not as a provisional associate, not as a non-voting observer, but as a full member with equal standing from the first day of the process. One additional condition. I read it twice. The condition was that before any membership negotiation began, the Council must conduct a full audit of its mission records for all probe losses in the past 150 years, specifically in sectors that had been subsequently claimed by emergent civilizations. The audit was to be independent, and its findings made public within the Council record system. "Why this condition?" I said. Peter Shaw looked at me steadily. "Because we were not the first species the Council underestimated," he said. "We have reason to believe we were not the first to respond to that underestimation by building something the Council could not see. And we have reason to believe that some of those species are still out there, and that nobody in the Council has looked for them." The room was very quiet. "Where?" I said. Alan Ford touched a panel on the table. The viewport display changed. A star chart appeared, covering a region of space well outside human territory, far to the galactic west. 12 points of light were marked on it. Each one had a designation code. 12 civilizations, Peter Shaw said, each one classified as extinct or dispersed in Council records, each one's last known location corresponding to a region that was subsequently visited by Council survey missions. He paused. "We started looking 20 years ago. We found the first one in year 3. It took time to earn their trust. They had reasons to distrust anything that looked like official contact." I stared at the chart. "They are alive," I said. "Yes," Diane Cole said, "living in zones similar to ours, smaller most of them, some quite large. They built them for the same reasons we built ours: time and careful work, and the understanding that visibility is a choice. They are here, I said. I meant inside the zone. Some of them, Alan Ford said. Those who chose to be. Others remain in their own spaces. But they know about this conversation. They asked us to tell you one thing. I waited. Peter Shaw said. They asked us to tell you that they are ready to be introduced, but only if the Council can demonstrate that it understands what it is being introduced to. I sat back in my chair. Outside the viewport, the quiet installations of the zone went about their business, steady and unhurried and completely real, the way things are when they have been real for a very long time without anyone noticing. I thought about Director Hollies at the window with his tea, saying they will grumble and then they will sign. I thought about 5 probes marked as navigational errors. I thought about 2 centuries of non-binding votes and provisional hearings, and a species sitting in the Council's waiting room, watching, learning and building something extraordinary in the silence between the observations. I picked up the document from the table. I will take this to the Council, I said. Peter Shaw nodded. We know, he said. We believe you will represent it honestly. It was, I realized, both a statement of confidence and a very gentle warning. I folded the document and put it in my jacket. I returned to Station 7 on a Thursday afternoon. The shuttle docked without ceremony. No one was waiting at the airlock except a single security officer who checked my identification with the bored efficiency of someone doing routine work. I was, on paper, a junior xenodiplomat returning from an authorized Parley mission. Nothing in the dock logs would suggest anything unusual had occurred. I walked to my quarters, sat down at my desk, and stared at the far wall for about 10 minutes. Then I turned on the recorder. I told it everything, all of it. The anchor point, the structures in the zone, the 300,000 people living there across installations the Council had been flying past for decades, the 12 civilizations marked on the star chart, the delegation crew playing board games with human technicians in an unlocked habitat ring, Petra van den Berg, and the expression on her face that was somewhere between fury and deep, uncomfortable respect. I told it about the terms. I read the document into the recorder, word by word, because I wanted a copy of it on record before I handed it to Director Hollies, and it entered the official system where other people would decide what it meant. Then I said this. The Council sent 17 ships into human space, and none of them came back on their own. But every single person on those ships is safe and unharmed, and the humans did not ask for anything in exchange for that. They did not ask for gratitude. They did not ask for a formal apology. They did not leverage the situation to extract concessions. They released the delegation because it was the right thing to do, and they made their actual requests separately and clearly, as items that stood on their own merit. That is not how a hostile civilization behaves. It is not even how a suspicious civilization behaves. It is how a patient civilization behaves, one that has had a very long time to decide what it values and has decided that honesty and fairness matter more than advantage, even when advantage is clearly available. I do not know how the Council will respond to the document I am carrying. I know what the options are. I have been in enough meetings to understand the arguments that will be made in that chamber. There will be voices that say this is a threat dressed as an offer. There will be voices that say humanity has revealed too much now, and the correct response is pressure while they are exposed. There will be voices that say the missing probes were a coincidence, and the 12 civilizations are a fabrication. None of those voices will be right, but they will be loud, and in large institutions, loud voices accumulate weight simply by virtue of being loud. What I can do is deliver the document accurately. What I can do is write my assessment honestly, without softening the parts that are uncomfortable. What I can do is say clearly, in the official record, that what I found in the zone was not a threat hidden behind politeness. It was a civilization that had decided to build something remarkable while the galaxy was not looking, and was now offering to share the view. The 12 civilizations on that star chart are real. I believe that completely. I believe it not because Alan Ford told me so, but because the logic of it is consistent with everything I found in the archive room. The Council lost probes. The Council classified losses as errors. The Council never looked carefully. Other species, facing the same institutional blindness, made the same choice humanity made: build quietly, hold still, wait. They were not extinct. They were waiting to see if the introduction would ever be worth making. Humanity has decided the time has come to try. I will deliver the document to Director Hollies in the morning. I will present my assessment at whatever meeting the Council convenes. I will say what I found, and I will say what I believe it means. And if the Council chooses to respond to an open hand with a closed one, then the record, at least, will show that the open hand was there. That a species that could have done far worse chose, every time there was a choice, to do something smaller and kinder than it needed to. The recording light is blinking, red steady once every 3 seconds. I think about 17 ships crossing into silence. I think about 9 words on an open channel, warm and mildly curious. I think about Peter Shaw saying we chose the option that caused the least disruption, and the weight of everything unsaid in that sentence. I think about Stanislav Petrov in a bunker, alone in the dark, deciding to wait before acting, because waiting was the harder and more careful thing. The Council entered human space expecting to collect a territory. They found instead a civilization that had spent a century and a half being more careful than anyone had asked them to be, more patient, more precise, more deliberate in every choice. And in the space that caution had quietly built, in the silence between our observations, they had filled it not with weapons or walls, but with people. With installations and families and a relay grid and 12 other species who had needed somewhere safe to be. The Galactic Council entered human space, and none of the ships came back on their own. But every single person came home. And in the morning, I am going to walk into Director Hollies' office and explain to him what that difference means. I think it means everything. The recorder is still running. I am going to let it run. Someone somewhere needed to hear this. I hope it was the right someone. I hope, when this record reaches wherever records go, that it finds the people in that chamber who still know how to listen to something unexpected without flinching from it. Humanity is at the door. They knocked properly this time. They are holding the ball, and they are waiting to see if we understand.